and you're running for the Republican nomination. Are you also seeking conservative or any other lines?
Yeah, well, we're right now seeking the Republican line, and we're talking through. Ultimately, we're going to go independent, conservative potentially. So we do want to seek another line. Right now, we're still 16 months out, 16 months in a day. So we're kind of discussing that right now and going to figure out the exact path, the best path to beat Andrew Cuomo on November 8th of 2022.
All right, so I'm sure a lot of people recognize your last name and know of your father, but tell me about you.
Yes.
Who are you independent of your father?
Absolutely. So for the last 4 years, I worked under President Trump in the White House, and what my focus specifically was on the private sector. I work in an office called the Office of Public Liaison, and a couple of the policy accomplishments that I was able to work on was the deregulatory platform. So when President Trump came into office, he promised for every regulation he signed into law, he'd cut 2. By the time he walked out of office, that was over 12-1. And I think that was one of the main reasons why we saw the unemployment rate in the United States of America at the lowest that it ever was since before man walked on the moon. And for African American, Asian American, and Hispanic Americans, the lowest that it was in recorded history. Also worked on the Paycheck Protection Program, CARES Act. So my role specifically in the White House was allowing the private sector, making sure the private sector had a voice in the policy-making process.
Yeah. So what are your major planks in terms of if you were to be elected New York governor? What would you do?
Well, we mentioned regulatory reform. On day one, we'd relight the economic furnace that is New York. Tax cuts is certainly something that we will start working on day one. That's going to have to be working through the Assembly and the State Senate. So we'll deliver that by the end of our first year. But on day one, we start deregulating for small and medium-sized businesses to make sure that New Yorkers and New York businesses are incentivized to build here in New York, not out of state. So we'll do that. We'll push more education from a charter school perspective. We want to see more school choice, and those tax dollars follow parents, not just actually be dictated by bureaucrats in Albany. And third, we have to stop the war on our cops. We've seen crime raise all across New York State. In Buffalo, for example, they are on track to have the most murders halfway through the year. The most murders in 2021 that at any point in Buffalo's recorded history. New York City, we've all seen the statistics in New York City with it spiraling out of control. Syracuse, it's up 43%. Rochester, up 68% in violent crime. We need to ultimately protect officers' qualified immunity. We need to repeal bail reform, and our police officers need to know that they have a friend in the governor's mansion, Governor Giuliani.
In terms of regulation and even tax cuts, obviously on the federal level, there's a lot more ability to issue executive orders than, obviously during the pandemic, they gave Cuomo unlimited power, but, that's ending now, it would seem. Won't you need partners in the legislature? What makes you think that the Democrats who have a stranglehold on the legislature will go along with your agenda?
That's why I always mention deregulation, because ultimately from a tax cuts perspective, you're right. This is going to have to be something from a tax cuts perspective that we're going to have to work through. And I say work through because ultimately if we have Democrats that want to go out there and continue to compete with the Californias of the world instead of the Floridas and the Texases, what I need to do is either convince them or ultimately work through them. How do we end up working through them? We end up putting pressure on them by going to their home districts and by talking directly to their constituents and explaining why ultimately we're not seeing the economic development because the tax cuts that we're trying to deliver are being held up. But from a regulatory standpoint, the governor's executive power exists where he ultimately can deregulate starting on January 1st of 2023 at 12:01 p.m. And that's what I intend to do. That does not have to be a legislative priority. That is an executive priority. And that is why I talk about that and promising on day one that we will deregulate for businesses across New York State, because I can deliver that as governor regardless of the state Senate and the state Assembly.
What's your response to the recent straw poll that went overwhelmingly in Lee Zeldin's favor? Are you at all concerned that the Republican establishment has already thrown in their lot with Mr. Zeldin?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a little background. We had heard a rumor a couple of weeks ago that there was a poll in the field coming from the congressman's pollster, and we waited about 10 days for the results, and there were no results that came out. So we commissioned our own poll because we were suspicious. Turns out that among 587 registered Republicans, we are leading by 8 points, leading the field. So I think really what's happening is we're developing a candidacy, maybe as the people's candidate, where the congressman may be developing an insider's party candidacy. I'd much rather be the people's candidate. We have multiple pathways to the ballot. What I can guarantee to New Yorkers is I will make sure that those 2.9 million Republicans will get a voice and an opportunity to vote for Andrew Giuliani in June of 2022, and to make sure that it's just not a couple of dozen guys in a backroom deal in Albany who are the ones who are picking your candidate. I believe the 2.9 million New Yorkers who are registered Republicans should have an opportunity to vote for Andrew Giuliani. And if they do that, I believe the 19.5 million New Yorkers will vote us as governor of New York on November 8th of 2022.
All right, I only have 2 more questions that I tend to ask all candidates for pretty much any office. We'll start with, why do you want to be governor?
That's a Ted Kennedy question, right? Well, I'll tell you what, for me, and my wife and I talked about this a little bit as soon as I left the administration. We took a couple of weeks off as I had canceled many vacation plans over the previous 4 years with her. And we were in Florida for a couple of days, and there was this amazing optimism that I felt there. When I realized what it was, it actually made me depressed. It was the same feeling I used to feel in New York. And I told her, I said, we need to get back and we need to fight to make sure that this doesn't leave New York. This needs to be something that comes back to New York, and that we start again to make New York the economic center of the world. So for me, it really is a love of our state. I love this state so much, and I'm sick and tired of being the laughingstock and seeing New Yorkers move to Florida, move to Tennessee, South Carolina, to Texas. I want to make sure that New York is the economic and the cultural center of the world again, the way it had been since we built the Erie Canal here. Remember, the Erie Canal connected the rest of the world to the United States of America through New York.
All right, and then finally, why should Republicans vote for you in the primary?
It's a great question. Well, I think for us, we ultimately present the best opportunity to win. I think if you'll see some of the matchup numbers, some of the other Republican candidates who are friends of mine just do not match up very well against Andrew Cuomo or another Democrat. For us, I think you will see that we will match up tremendously well. We'll be able to bring over those independents, and we'll also be able to bring over some crossover Democrats. So if New Yorkers want to win, if New York Republicans want to win on November 8th of 2022, I'm the guy.
All right, I think I'm good. Anything else you'd like to add? I didn't think to ask.
All I would say is thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. We got 16 months and 1 day until the election. We are going to continue to push every single one of those days to make sure that New York has a brighter future and that the best chapters are still to be written of New York. If anybody wants to volunteer, go to our website. Anybody wants to donate, certainly go to our website as well, nyforgiuliani.com. But thank you very much for your time. I hope you guys are able to get out here and watch a couple of golf shots. I don't know if I'm going to be able to, although I've got a couple of friends that are out there. I'm not going to call them old friends. I'm going to call them longtime friends.
Great. All right. Thanks.